Karen and I have known each other for years. And so the origin story of this work that we have done together is that um, Karen and I both had worked in food media and worked in writing and reporting, and we had also shared a deep connection with apples. You have, in your case.
Well, tell your story
Okay,
first, and then
let's start. Um, so I grew up in the French Shore in the Acadian region of Clare at Abbaye Sainte-Marie. And within that context, I decided to write a book called Pantry and Palate. If you will go. There we go. Pantry and Palate, Remembering and Rediscovering Acadian Food, where I looked into the perspective and also a familial perspective. And in researching the book, I always fell upon interesting anecdotes. And one of the anecdotes is one that my father told me. My father, Hector Thibault, has a small hobby orchard in Church Point, Nova Scotia. And one day he just said, "Oh, by the way, did you know that there's an old Acadian strain that I'm growing? There's like maybe 2 trees." Like, no, Dad, you didn't tell me. And then my mother says, "Oh, yeah, there's some research on that. There's an old pamphlet that my great great uncle published in like 1932 or something like that." Okay, so interestingly enough, I find these material and place it in the book. Um, didn't really think much of it at the time. I just was like, okay, this is interesting. A bit of culinary and agricultural heritage within the history of it all. But the thing is, working as a journalist, and Karen and I both dealt with this a lot, is we want to be able to prove things. We want to be able to say definitively, and anecdotes and family apocrypha was not always the way to do that. But Karen saw something different.
all right. You may be able to tell from my accent, but I am not originally from Nova Scotia. I grew up in Ontario, but in Ontario, I grew up working on my grandfather's farm on the Credit River in Port Credit, or really Streetsville. And he had lots of heirloom varieties. I kind of grew up with apples in my blood. And so when I moved to Nova Scotia and got to know Simon, or Simon, as he was introduced to me at the time, we had a lot of things in common, but apples were kind of one of those things that glued us together. And when I read Pantry and Palate, his fabulous Acadian cookbook, I just, those when a fact or a name just kind of lodges itself in your mind, I thought Belliveau, like this sounds like something someone should probably save, right? Like that's all these heirloom varieties, they're disappearing. We need to save them. So when I was at graduate school in New York City, I was doing a master's in science journalism. I had to do various assignments. And I thought, what about that Belliveau apple? Because when I would go talking to Americans, they had never heard of the Acadians. They had never heard of the expulsion. They were pretty unaware of it. And I was like, I'm going to dig into this history. I'm going to, interview Simon's mother. And she had all this genealogical information. It was just a really compelling project. And I wrote it, and for this class assignment, didn't think twice until there's a conference in the UK called the Oxford Food Symposium. This is the yearly proceedings of last year's symposium. And the theme was fruit and flowers, gardens, flowers, and fruit. And I reached out to Simon and said, hey, would you be interested in like getting a little bit deeper on this apple? And we're both kind of lone wolves. We're used to kind of working on our own. We're both self-employed, but we kind of embarked on this journey and really and truly had no idea where it would lead.
Well, it was interesting because Karen was so devoted to this. I'm like, we will never find anything. I really did not. I had a hard time, and this was the interesting part because the thing that happens oftentimes in journalism is they talk about bias, or in reporting, you talk about bias and what you can see and what you cannot see. And there were certain things that I could not see that Karen could see. But by the same token, there were certain things that I needed to explain to her as to the significance of these things within the context of being Acadian. So we were able to both answer and ask questions of each other to make sure that we had the right story here in all of this. And so one of the things within that was this is the little pamphlet that I mentioned earlier.
Tell us about FJG, Simon.
So this was published for the Dominion Atlantic Railway as a project to help promote the Annapolis Valley when the railroads came in. And specifically, FJG Comeau worked for the Dominion Atlantic Railway, but what he was interested in was Acadian history and presenting how important the Acadians were to apple cultivation in Nova Scotia and North America. He had this bee in his bonnet that it was always Quebec that was listed as the first place where apples were
Mhm.
cultivated. And he was devoted to prove no, that it was in the Annapolis Valley that cultivation and agricultural cultivation started. And he was able, 100 years ago, to dig into all of these things, to find as much information as he could about his ancestors and dug into it as much as he could. And thankfully, his archives were donated to my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. He went through them after his retirement, organized them all, and donated them to the Centre Acadien, which is the Acadian Center at University St. Anne's. So it's the entire archive of literally 50 years of correspondence of everything he ever received and sent is at the university. And in digging through them, I was able to find that 100 years ago, one of my ancestors was looking to find the history of this one particular apple. And there was correspondence dictating the history of it because, as I was saying earlier with Karen, when we would ask people, they say, well, we heard this about the apple, or I heard that about the apple. And we're like, no, we want definitive proof. And in this way, Comeau had been talking to agriculturalists, historians, genealogists looking to find all of this. But the genealogy portion was always interesting too, because as Acadians, I mean, most Atlantic Canadians were always like, who's your father? But Acadians, it's not just, it's who do you belong to? So in my case, I am Simon, son of Hector, son of Ulysses, son of William, son of Celestine, son of Isidore. And so,
And when I
Quebec.
heard that
Yeah.
story as a woman, as someone who first encountered uh, the woman who would eventually become, for me, the heart and soul of this project, she was introduced to me as Mrs. Frederick Belliveau. Her name had been kind of written out of history. And it was something about that moment. I was like, I'm going to find out what her name is, and I'm going to write it back into the record. And that is what brought me to Simon's mother's amazing genealogical work. And so this is like this, the confluences are unbelievable because I'm interested in apple breeding, and I've toured the Okanagan Valley. I'm interested in the hybridization and the genetics and like the fact that we're selecting for certain types of fruit over flavor or culture. And so I found Marie Modeste, and then that kind of formed the quest of finding, who was the one person who either had a scion or a seed, took it from her father's orchard in Port Royal post deportation, planted it on her orchard, her family's orchard in the kind of region where Simon grew up. That was a tree that we ended up finding a drawn sketch of the tree before it was felled. And that was a tribute to Simon's incredible connections within this community and his ancestors' incredible records at the University of St. Anne.
But it was this funny thing that, as Karen was saying, confluences of things. One of the examples of this is that when my book came out, a couple of people emailed me and said, hey, can I have some scions of this Belliveau? So I put them into contact with my father, one of whom was Ted Hutton, who was from Hutton Family Farm in Lakeville. And then there was another person. I said to Karen, I don't remember who it was, but somebody somewhere, oh, well, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so then we did a 1 week residency at the Jampolis Cottage, courtesy of the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia. And Simon brought all of his books and his records, and I brought my documents that I had found. And I found on, I think, a blog, some mention of a farm in Ontario that had this apple. So these are two baby Belliveau trees that were being grown by Bill O'Keefe, and that's his son Sean, and they have hundreds of rare varieties. They receive no government support. They have these impeccably labeled maps of all these rare varieties. And there's some Apple people in the audience, I know. There's this kind of gray market of people mailing scions to each other kind of throughout North America. And so they said, oh, like we got these apples from David Maxwell, and we're like, okay, David Maxwell. So then investigative journalist I'm like, I need to find David Maxwell. So I looked up in the phone book, David Maxwell, just blind cold call him. He's like, who the heck are you? Why the heck are you calling me? And I said, have you heard of the Belliveau Apple? I hear you grow rare varieties. And he said, oh, let me look through my email. I have the name of the person who gave me the scion here. I was emailing with Simon Thib, and I look at Simon and I think you could have saved us dozens of hours of research, sir. But eventually we made the connection. It turned out that David Maxwell got the scions from Hector Thibault, had mailed those to Ontario, where they were then propagated by Bill O'Keefe and his family. And the summer that a University of Guelph program dedicated to codifying the genetics of rare apples, had visited the O'Keefe Grange and had taken a leaf sample from this apple and had analyzed it. The chances are just getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer as the story unfolds.
Let alone that this is something that we would be looking into, that there would be a way for us to record this information. It was kind of insane. But for me, there was this moment where this is not just family legend. This is definitive proof as to the history, culinary, agricultural, what Karen and I like to call, instead of the patrilineal, the matrilineal line of history found within this work.
Because that's how apple genetics are passed down through the literal fruit. Like without the mother tree, the father trees are kind of irrelevant because those turn into seeds that don't end up being planted anyways, right? In some ways, it's kind of flipping the story back on itself.
No, you're all right.
Okay.
But the other thing that was interesting in doing all this research beyond that was looking into the history of the Annapolis Valley and apples in and of itself, specifically how when after the Acadians had been deported, essentially what was left was this swaths of apples and like arable land, which was then later settled upon by the planters and other groups. But that was literally the foundation, the infrastructure for the entire industry of apple production in Nova Scotia was done through that act.
Because when the Acadian trees dropped their seeds and then you had the baby seedlings come up, the British recorded thickets of lusty seedlings. And those seedlings were then separated and used as rootstock for the origin of the Annapolis Valley crops.
But it was interesting for the two of us because we were starting to see how the character of apples shaped the Annapolis Valley in and of itself. And so all of us, Karen and I, are digging through all of this and we're like, okay, we got together. We had the time at Jampolis Cottage in the Annapolis Valley, which was stunning. And then we headed. Oops, before I do that.
Yes. Oh, varieties.
Yes. One of the interesting things was looking at the varieties which were grown in the Annapolis Valley. So this is from that pamphlet by FJG Comeau. This is a list. This is a partial list of varieties grown in Nova Scotia, which is insane.
Oh, and you can see there's someone in the audience who remembers eating a wealthy. If you know where to find a wealthy, please email the Wild Flora Society because we need to find a wealthy.
Yes.
For our new friend here. See, there's a wealthy right there.
Yep. So, and then even though like it lists of these varieties, the following arranged approximately in the order of ripening are of commercial importance in the fruit district of Nova Scotia and whatnot. So there was crazy to see how much there is, and
how much we've lost, and that kind of almost radicalized us in terms of the consolidation of the industry, the fact that these growers are only growing like what 10 varieties now, essentially. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we went to the Jampolis Cottage. We were biking around Simon's traditional kind of cultural area. I was stopping at cider places, drinking this cider that was billed as heirloom cider, but really it was just, full of whatever apples are around. And we learned that like the history is basically during the Second World War, when the export of apples to Britain collapsed, these growers just cut down thousands and thousands of apple trees. There was no market, and they just cut them all down. And those trees, in some ways, are the ancestors of those wild trees you see growing on roadsides that we were talking about earlier across Nova Scotia, right? That a lot of that genetic material has kind of gone feral.
There's a wonderful little expression in the Acadian community where I grew up for an apple. In English, we say it's gone to seed. In French, you say it's un pommier chier, which means that it's literally gone to expletive, or that it has been expletively laid there. So, like, if a random tree that is growing up in a random place, so you're like, oh, ben c'était pommier chier, meaning that it was probably deposited there through normal biological process. This is just a little anecdote. That tree on the right is a pommier chier in Clare that I took, but I just thought the apple just looked lovely. All of this to say, Karen and I end up, thanks to the best part about this project was the interest and the support that we have received for this. The Acadian Cultural Federation of Nova Scotia, as well as the Department of Acadian Affairs, helped subsidize our trip to London and then to Oxford University at the Oxford Food Symposium to go and present the history of this apple at the Oxford Food
A
Symposium.
story that Simon thought was like, oh, no one's interested in our like dumb Acadian apple.
Not that, but it was
No.
more like we'll never be able to prove it, but we did.
But we did.
And so it was really satisfying for the two of us because Karen and I have also, being freelancers, we're constantly reading everything we can get our hands on. And so we were surrounded by individuals who, even though it's at Oxford, there was no snobbery. This was a question of people being intensely curious about the smallest little details. Tell us about this apple. Tell us where we can get it. We met everything from cider makers to geneticists to folklorists. Like everybody was just fascinated by this, and people were willing to donate information to help us in this research. And the thing that led after it was that Karen was devoted to telling the story on a larger scale. Specifically, here.
You might not be able to see it.
Nope, the oh, screen series apologies for those who are offline. The where we wanted it to be seen was in Canadian Geographic.
And so it was, there's this magazine over here. Actually, I'll hold it up to the
There you
screen.
go. Perfect.
Turn
sharing off for a second.
Okay, stop share.
It's in the do.
So this is the current newsstand edition of Canadian Geographic. And in it, an amazing photographer, Aaron McKenzie, went out and spent time with Simon and his parents. And an article about the journey is documented in, and you can see a little bit about the movement of this apple down the coast of Nova Scotia. And one of note for me, this is the drawing of a tree that was estimated to be over 100 years old, one of the original Belliveau apple trees.
The original
Apple tree that was in someone's family archive that Simon managed to dig up.
And so it was interesting beyond that to see the interest that people had towards this. And so Karen, expanding upon it, I actually went back to the community in Clare and did an event where I sought out and put up news notices in newspapers and local publications saying, do you have a Belliveau apple in your backyard? If so, please contact me. So people in the community contacted me, letting me know if they had one. And what that also led to me is that there was an interest in this. This tree is the tree that my father used to get scions from, and it is on the home of a woman named Colleen Campbell, former deputy MLA for the region. The home that she lives in is of the son of Marie Modeste and Frederick Belliveau. That house has been there since the 1800s, and that tree, we figure, is at least 150 years old and still produces fruit to this day. Colleen was kind enough to give us 30 scions, which we were then able to give out to people in the community. A wonderful woman named Denise Flynn, originally Thibault, but no relation. And then she taught people how to graft apple trees for themselves, gave out the wax, gave out the tape, told people how to do it. And so it's the beginning of getting people to not just learn about their own agriculture and cultural heritage, but to kind of propagate it into the present and into the future.
Hmm. And for a journalist, like me, I'm used to putting out a story, you talk to people, it runs, you might never hear from anyone ever again, right? In this case, it was the chance to actually save this apple. It is more meaningful, really, than a lot of projects I take on because it will be a tangible link to that Acadian past that then Simon's nieces can look at that tree and be like, our great, 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 great,
Somewhere.
great. And the beautiful kicker for me is that for a long time, the family myth in Simon's family was that they were related to Frederick Belliveau through his father.
Yes.
It turned out that he was actually related to Marie Modeste through Jeanne,
My
his
mother.
mother. But
And then we were able to publish this. So Karen's holding the copy of the book. This is The Fall of the Acadian Belliveau, Genetics, Genealogy, and Recovery of Pomological Matrimoine. I'm looking to actually have this translated into French, which I'll then be placing on my website, as well as all the archival material. And so this is part of it. That one of the things that Karen and I talked about a lot is that, as she said, that this is a thing of you usually just write something and you let it go, is that journalism is often very extractive. And we wanted to make sure that this information, not just what we present, but the source material, both physical and in terms of like archival, being able to be brought back to the community. And so that was this is the kind of journalism and that we're really interested in and the kind of ways of approaching all of this. Anything else you want to bring up?
Just that genetic work is ongoing. That there is a program down in the States that if we send a leaf or some genetic material of the Belliveau apple to this lab, they may be able to identify which other apples are potentially its parent variety. And so we may be able to trace it a little bit farther back to how did this tree come to be planted on Marie Modeste's father's original pre-deportation farm. But that is kind of another valence that we have not yet crossed. But it's exciting to think that there's more work to be done on both sides, both into the past and the future.
That's everything. Thank you.
So this is why we're going to do questions. So
one thing, because the people at home won't be able to hear anybody in the audience.
Yes.
Anyone here that asks a question, do you mind repeating that?
Of course.
Of course.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Ask us your question.
Near my house in Dartmouth, there is a Tim Hortons. On the very edge of the property, there is an apple tree. And we picked the apples and took them home and made apple jelly. Nobody else seemed to be interested. But there aren't any apple trees around.
Yeah.
Where would that have come from?
Great question. So the question was, in Dartmouth, there's a Tim Hortons, and in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons, at the edge of the lot, I know the Tim Hortons you mean. I walk past that Tim Hortons all the time. There's an apple and tree, and she picked it and made apple jelly. What is that apple doing there? How are you asking also how it got pollinated, or how is it still producing?
How did it get there?
Or how did it get there in the first place? Well, a lot of these trees have been there for a long time, and the species, like in the case of the Belliveau, they can last for decades and decades and decades. So it could have been planted as an ornamental tree. You don't think so? Well, we're now more.
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No.
Before the Tim Hortons.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, may I ask when the apples are ready? What time of year? October. Because people would often plant particular varieties, either an early bearing or a particular favorite close to the home. And so the early favorites, the early ones were there to be used for making jelly and or adding pectin to fruits and jams. The other one would be like, let's just have an apple tree close to the house, because a lot of people did not have a lot of fruit. So you would just have those trees. But I know that in rural communities, you would have the one or two trees that you truly love close to the house. But then amongst the Acadians specifically, the actual orchards would be inland because we would be where we were so close to the ocean, it would be difficult for the trees. So you would go all the way back into the woods. So most people would have what was called un jardin des pommiers, which is uh, an apple garden, which is where you would actually grow. They would use the term garden rather than orchard, which is something that you would tend to, which would be away from the house rather than just a few trees close to the house.
But we'd have to look at historical maps to see. It's like a which came first, the Tim
Exactly.
Hortons or the apple tree?
Oh, so I imagine it was once part of.
So you imagine it was once part of someone's garden. And yeah.
You had a question?
Is that available?
Oh, for those who were looking at the screen earlier, when I was sharing my screen, for those who cannot see, those are actually an image of quinces. But all the other images during the presentation, those were
How do
all.
you describe Belliveau now? Because we deprived them.
So the Belliveau apple for those who have ever had, texturally speaking, something similar to a Cox's orange pippin, so a tight textured flesh that is also, we've seen descriptions of it being redolent of orange kind of flavor to it. The other thing too is that it's usually a green embedded with red striations. So if there's a lot of foliage, it'll be more green than red. So for example, the mother tree, which exists in Colleen Campbell's home that I showed a photo of earlier, her particular apples tend to be much redder because there's less foliage, while my father's tend to be a little bit more than the green, but there's always that red striation all the way down of it.
And very sweet and crisp for the apples of the time.
Yes.
Years ago, I was told, I have a little piece of property down near Kedgmakuchik, which is close to South Brookfield. And apparently South Brookfield used to be, and somebody told me that they originated the apples before, into production before the Annapolis Valley started to produce apples.
This is exactly the question was that.
I went down into Brookfield Mines a couple of years ago, and the whole place is obliterated with different variety apples. I mean, the trees are old, they're all scraggly now, but they're still producing apples. And on my property, I have an apple, and I think it's called a Lodi. Have you ever heard of a Lodi apple?
So the TLDR version of the question is that the individual who asked the question is that in Brookfield, specifically South Brookfield, there is information stating that that is one of the original places where apples were cultivated, and therefore afterwards the question was if we had ever heard an apple called as the Lodi, and yes, I have.
You have?
Yes.
Oh, tell us.
I've only ever heard it referred to in older books about apples specifically.
I just want to use this as a quick tangent that one of the reason why talking to groups like this is so important and urgent, and why the work of the O'Keeffes and David Maxwell is so urgent, is because this is something that some governments support through, agricultural breeding programs, trying to keep some genetic stock of these rarer varieties. But they're breeding for, like I said, being able to drop an apple from the height of a house and have it not bruise, that they're not breeding for flavor in these things. And so what it means is that there's a mandate for people like yourself. If you have a Lodi apple, maybe there's an opportunity to give a Lodi apple scion to someone else who's interested in that variety, right? Like having that conversation with the apple growers in your area. I know Ted Hutton, a farmer that we're both close with, he's eager to save a lot of these varieties for the sake of saving them. And there are testing programs. If you have like an apple in your backyard, at your cottage, something that you think, oh, this is a great apple, there are programs where you can mail in genetic material. They will test your tree and they will let you know, like, if this is a real variety or kind of the provenance of it.
No, and it's also the interesting thing too is that more and more these days, historical and agricultural groups rather than government bodies are the ones who are looking to find as much information as they can. I recently spoke to the Hans Historical Society about this, about the Belliveau Apple. And so there are often historical organizations in various communities that are looking for ways to engage with a new membership, and food is usually the number one way to do it. And so this kind of information is like finding the Lodi tree or finding more information. There are ways to share this information in larger contexts. Yes.
So what is the status right now of the Belliveau apple growing? It's being grown in Ontario, and there are some young trees here. Is that what I'm?
The question was, what is the status of the Belliveau now as to where it's being grown? If you wanted to start with the Ontario, you said.
But you start here and we'll
Okay.
go broader.
Yes. So yes, due to David Maxwell, who is an amateur historian, former doctor, and lover of apples, he has a few in his garden outside of La Have. The interesting thing was, and we know of the originator of the tree being felled in 1912, I think.
Around then.
Yeah, around then. But that the son of the originator of the apple had the tree in his backyard, and that's where all the scions that everybody uses now pretty much comes from that one. However, in the years since I've done this research, or done this presentation that Karen and I went to Oxford and did all our research together, I've done presentations since then, and people come up to me and tell me, I think I have one in my backyard. And so people have constantly been telling me that they have them and or that they want them. We've had requests from people from like California, and which of course we can't send them, but people are looking towards finding this variety. And so people are interested in it. But the other thing too is that, do you remember, was it you who got in touch with the Belliveau Orchard?
Yeah.
Tell this.
So when David Maxwell was first interested in saving this variety, he contacted quite a famous New Brunswick kind of commercial apple grower, the Belliveaus, thinking like, of course they're interested in preserving it. But the margins that these farmers work under are so slim that like no one has time for like a fun new hobby, they had no interest in doing this. He went to there's an orchard that was being grown as part of like a federally funded Dalhousie project that hasn't had anyone in charge of that orchard that houses rare varieties in years, since the PI on that project basically said he didn't want to do it anymore. And so there's like just a gap in knowledge, in expertise. There's also some of these apples at the Annapolis Royal
Historical
Gardens. So if you go down, they have like a little Acadian where they're trying to recreate like the farming methods and the building methods. So if you're ever in Annapolis Royal, check out you can see some Belliveaus there. But again, they think they're Belliveaus. We can trace them back to the tree from the scions.
They know that those are Belliveaus because those are from my dad.
There you go. But for a lot of the Belliveaus, people are coming up and saying, "Oh, I think I have a Belliveau." If we don't have the genetic information, then there's risk is that it gets sucked back into the realm of like fairy tale, right? Yeah.
This is the difficulty. There was a question online.
I see your,
yes, David Petriquin.
Yeah,
Pardon me if I didn't get your name. So if David Petriquin can place that question out on the meeting chat, it'll be fantastic.
Did he talk?
Possibly.
Is David allowed to talk?
I can you hear me?
You have to turn up your speaker.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. No, the question I was interested in is you mentioned there's a place you can send stuff for they do an analysis on it if you send them genetic material. What is that genetic material you send them? A piece of apple or what is it?
The leaf, actually.
The leaf?
So you take a leaf in spring and it contains like the freshest, best genetic material.
The
and there's
reason
labs in there's one at the University of Washington that's particularly renowned. The University of Guelph their Flora Apple project has since been shuttered. They still have the capability. They just need someone to take over that lab. But yeah, the University of Washington is your best bet, and we will look for it while you answer the next question, and we'll put it in the chat.
Is it expensive to do that?
You'll have to escape from there.
Okay.
You are.
He's asking if it's expensive.
You have to ship the actual material. You'd have to contact them first.
Yeah,
They will send you small plastic materials that are like little tubes, like a test tube
yeah,
with silica inside of it, and then you replace that inside to ensure that it is as well maintained as possible.
right.
And so then you would have to ship it to them. Although right now, I don't know because of mailing to the US. I don't
Yeah.
know what the story is.
No,
Just
the
say it's
reason
a
I'm
gift.
Yes,
the reason I'm
exactly.
asking, just
Karen's
out of
looking at the Washington State University's tree fruit program. I've actually walked
yeah,
through that program's orchard. It's really quite stunning to see
yeah,
what they have in there. But the other thing is that when Karen brought up with David Maxwell contacting Belliveau, a lot of commercial growers beyond the economic margins, if there is no recorded history of the genome of an apple, then it becomes very difficult for them to
yeah,
prove the parentage or if there are any other issues. So they can't say, oh, well, you could just call it a Belliveau, but it may not be a Belliveau. And so this will be a way of to essentially concretize what is the agricultural and kind of genetic history of this.
yeah. I'll just mention can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just mentioned the reason I'm asking. A few years back, I started working with a group in St. Margaret's Bay, have a conservation project on a piece of land. And when we explored it, it had been let go to bush for maybe 80 years. It was full of old apple trees, and they're
Hmm.
still there. And we're wondering well, I've just been wondering, what can we do to follow up on them? And I think one of them must be well over 100 years old. But there's a lot of trees in there. Is there any, like, just in the summertime when the leaves are out, that's what you need is samples of the leaves.
Spring.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Thank you.
And I bet if you ask nicely, maybe they could give you like a bulk discount.
Thank you very
Anything else,
much.
David, before we move into our
No,
next
I
question?
think that's it. Thank you. It was a
Thank
very good
you.
talk. Very
We have
interesting.
Carol.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question if possible. In my young gardening days, I did try to grow apples and I had to give up because of disease. Are these apples disease free?
Not necessarily disease free, but they are so far resisted. I mean, the trees that are growing, like the older trees, have not, the photos that I've seen of older trees are not affected by blight. There might be some minor scabbing, but those would be purely cosmetic rather than anything else. Like it's not like you're gonna get what is it called? Black knot like you get on plums or other kind of trees. I haven't seen it so much. But this is the other thing that's interesting too, and that I know that specifically Karen is interested in when we're talking about food systems is like what is there from a genetic perspective that can be used in terms of everything from climate change to resiliency and whatnot.
Well, and one of the challenges is that when you are just breeding for commercial growers who could just bathe their apples in pesticides. Just like one of my most defining memories of my grandfather's farm was the smell of the DDT in the shed, right? Like and even now my grandfather used to say the only difference between an organic apple and an apple from a farm that is unblemished is that they both use pesticides because otherwise you wouldn't get an apple at all. So I think what's interesting from like a research perspective is the fact that some of these older varieties are not catching these modern diseases, right? You would hope this would be something that a research lab would be interested in. But the challenge is that these apple breeding programs it's kind of like a needle in a haystack because what you're getting is like a hand pollinated blossom in a research orchard. And then they just take like a little swab and they kind of pollinate the apple. Oh, Simon has a stack of books.
No, keep on telling you, finish your story.
But what it means is that some of those I've toured these labs like in the Okanagan, and you would think like you would breed a tasty apple with a tasty apple. They will turn out tasteless, rock hard, intolerably bitter, like because of they're called heterozygous and the genetics just kind of it's like a constant party. They're just constantly ricocheting within the genome. And so it's a very kind of trial and error process.
The fun thing is that there are places to find more information. I mean, Karen and I know a small amount, but there's always so much more to be found. And one of the things that we are also obsessives about books about apples, so we want to show them to some of you. One book that we both love is a book by Rowan Jacob. Oh, thank you. Rowan Jacobson's Apples of Uncommon Character. This book was published a few years ago. It's still pretty easy to find. It includes tasting notes, history, agricultural, and otherwise of the apple. So everything from commercial varieties to specific other ones that are like a bit harder to find. Jacobson has written about oysters. He's one of the great American food writers. I know that Karen and I both referred to this book at various points as, if not within the work itself, but also in terms of where else to look.
Also, real apple people love russets.
Another great book is Valley Gold. You can still see all my sticky notes. Valley Gold, written by Anne Hutton, the mother of Ted Hutton of in Lakeville Hutton Family Farm. This book is essentially the economic, agricultural, and historical examination of the apple industry in Nova Scotia. It is a fantastic read, and so really good if you're looking for anything from history to what was grown where and why, and also the economics of it all. Hutton even talks about how apple barrels, which were used to ship apples to England, were actually invented in the Annapolis Valley. It's a great book. It is a little bit harder to find, but if you go to secondhand bookstores in Nova Scotia, I've seen it in most places.
They also have it at the Central Library on the Heritage Reading Room.
Yes.
In the Nova Scotia collection.
If you're looking for something literary, but still fantastic, Helen Humphrey's The Ghost Orchard, which started as an anecdote where Humphreys eats an apple called the blue pearmain and becomes obsessed with specifically the lives of women in apples, including people such as Deborah Griscom Passmore, who was a painter who, with the United States, the USDA, painted hundreds of varieties of fruit. It's a fantastic read.
What we did before the internet.
Yeah. Also, Comfort Me with Apples by Julian Gwynn, easy to find. It is the history of the Nova Scotia Fruit Growers Association. We got a lot of great information in here. On an international scale, there's a French chef named Raymond Blanc, who lives in the UK, but wrote a book called The Lost Orchard, where he talks about finding older varieties of apples, where he's been trying to save them and preserve them on the land and making an actual economically viable form of apple production for older varieties.
I have a question for the audience. Would you consider a feral apple wild flora? Why not is one of the answers. Is any answers from the audience? What would you say? So it doesn't count as wild.
No, it doesn't count as native, but
except the crab apple.
Yes.
Yes.
Crab apples are native to North America, but the variety of apples that we usually eat are not.
Yes.
Now, I'm not exactly sure where they came from, but for somewhere in Europe.
So in the case of
trace them back further than Nova Scotia.
So the question or the comment was basically like, where did they come from? So what we found the most, actually, you keep talking and I'll find the exact passage.
I'm actually getting low on battery. I just
You're
realized.
getting low on battery.
Yes.
Like how low? How
I do. Yes.
Okay. So the information we have is that back when the land was known as Mi'kma'ki, and the French colonial conquest began in 1604 when Pierre de Gaudemont and Samuel Champlain crossed the Atlantic. So they brought cider with them. We know that. In 1605, they landed and were welcomed by some Mi'kmaq residents, and they founded Port Royal. We found Jesuit records from 1612, which are the earliest, that note that trees in the area were already bearing fruit. So they would have brought seedlings with them on those colonial ships because they had no way of guaranteeing that the crops would, that there would be enough food to feed them. So 1612, and that is the earliest recorded example of apple cultivation in what is now known as North America. And so that you can tell all your friends it started in Nova Scotia.
France. Oh, before that, Kazakhstan.
Okay.
They are originally, apples are originally from Kazakhstan.
There's a YouTube documentary, I think, about somebody that traveled there and the range of apples in this sort of this big field. There's like all sorts of bizarre apples that, some are like purple, some are like there's just
Yes.
large, small, everything. It's quite amazing.
There's one whose name I'm going to bastardize. I think it's Nitskorovsky or something like that. But it is a Kazakh apple that is high in tannins, deep ruby red flesh, and that apple is still used in crossbreeding programs to create a pink kind of coloration in modern apples.
So yes, someone in the chat mentioned Sean Miles from Dalhousie University. He's no longer with that program. So he does have an amazing panel to genotype the tree, and he worked on Canada's apple biodiversity collection, but he no longer does that work because he is currently selling cheese, very delicious cheese with the Annapolis Cheese Company.
Oh, cool.
Anything else?
I have a
Thank you.
question for you, which is being a food writer.
Yeah.
How would you describe the range of the different heritage apples and, like, what are we missing that, people haven't had the chance?
You go first.
No, you go first.
What are we missing?
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to editorialize as to what you're missing. I will say this. Apples are a seasonal fruit. One. Apples have microseasons, meaning that there are apples which happen early in the season from August until September. The earlier the apple, the shorter the shelf life it'll have. Some, such as yellow transparent, will last a day. Sweet Bow, you can still find around here nowadays, which is or even a Jersey Mac, which is a lighter. They tend to be much higher in acidity, but then you get like mid-season apples, like Gravensteins, which were brought over. Someone mentioned Charles Prescott, who is essential to the bringing of that apple to North America. And then later varieties that even do better once they're cellared. We were talking about russets. Certain varieties of russets do better once they have been cellared for a month or two. And so remember that apples are a seasonal fruit. They can be evergreen. We now live in a time where we live in this kind of evergreen space of food, but to truly understand, and even at that, I actually just this weekend was at the farmer's market and handed an Annapolis Royal developed variety called the Royal Cortland. And I passed it to a friend of mine and he said, I've never tasted a Cortland that actually made me want to eat it because he'd been buying them from the grocery store. But to actually get one that had been cultivated recently made him go, oh, it's worth the time. Yeah, they are fantastic.
Yeah.
The Belliveau apple, is that
Yes,
an eating apple?
it is an eating apple. It is an eating apple.
A hand apple,
Yes.
as they would call a hand apple.
Yes,
Into it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Spider
Cider. So
You're-
cider apples. What are we losing? We are losing everything, I think. But the beautiful thing is that if you go to an orchard, talk to someone who's familiar with the trees, like hang around long enough and ask enough questions, you will in some cases get like a personal truck ride, and the farmer will say, this is this apple and I got it from here, and this is this apple and I got it from here. And so this is the type of thing that once you start asking the questions and doing the research, the rewards will multiply. And again, there's nothing like taking a fresh apple off a tree and eating it. It's like you get to know its genetic character.
History. Mention the history aspect.
What do you mean?
How it's a living piece of history.
Well, that's it, because we talked about the genetics of the apple, that all the apples are clones because it's so hard to find a variety. Every apple is basically a clone of the mother tree. And so that idea, like when you are holding an apple, when I hold a Belliveau in my hand, I am almost transposing my body over the body of Marie Modeste. That's how I felt, like I'm just a woman with an apple in my hand, about to take a big old bite.
And you get the exact same flavor.
And you
that
get the
she did.
same flavor. You get it's like a time capsule through history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And russets are amazing, and farmers love them. They keep forever. They're a little bit tannic. They're so interesting. There's nothing like the skin of a russet under your mouth, right? It's just so tactile.
And there's more than just the golden russet. There are various russets. That's the best part.
Look at it. We're so fired up about this. Yes. And
It
so
is.
we just want to announce that we're taking our honorarium that we're getting from the society, and we're both going to become members because your work sounds so interesting.
You're already.
Oh.
Yeah, we're going to sign up other people then because this is your field trip sounds so amazing. The research you're doing sounds so incredible. Like this is the type of grassroots organizing we need to see in order to preserve these varieties. So I just want to say, yeah, like thank you for having us. Thank you to everyone in the Zoom room. This is the stuff that keeps us passionate about what we do, is the work that y'all do. Really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just, before we go, can we just check through some of the comments?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, like, can you explain what a scion is?
Scion is a branch of a tree, of an apple tree, which is then used to be attached to the rootstock.
It's like a tiny little bud. It would be like this, smaller than my finger. And it just needs enough of the kind of green, you are plant people, you know the technical name for this.
The cambium, is that what you're talking about?
See, there you go. Yeah, that you just need enough to kind of get a good graft with the rootstock. But it can be just very little.
I was looking through earlier. Yeah, somebody mentioned Prescott. There's another one at the bottom. There's another thank you. Charlie the tree guy has lots of. Charlie the tree guy.
Tell us who Charlie is. Oh, maybe maybe he prunes trees.
Possibly, yes.
No. He sells lots and lots of trees. Look at his website. He has a whole list. I was just looking at them, and God knows what they are, but there's a whole whack of them.
He's in Old Barns outside of Truro.
That's right.
I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, Charlie the tree guy.
I don't know if any of them are, historical ones or not, but there's a whole bunch of them.
Also, apologies if in the next few minutes my Zoom logs out. I'm on a low battery. Embarrassingly so.
Thanks for coming, Norm.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. If anybody has any other questions, you can look up my website, simontiba.com, and you can also look up Karen's, which is...
Send all questions to him.
All right.
But buy my book.
Yes!
Kings of Their Own Ocean, Tuna Obsession and the Future of Their Seas.
Thank you, everyone.
I want to thank you for a really wonderful talk. Your enthusiasm is contagious. I mean, and you do a great job, the two of you, bouncing off each other. Well done. Yeah. Very entertaining. It was a great, riveted every moment of it. So that was really excellent, and good visuals as well. So that was very good.